So far, I've tried to make 2021 the year of unfinished business. Since there aren't a ton of new games coming out these days that I'm particularly interested in, and due to the circumstances I don't imagine there will be for a while, I can't imagine a better time for me to start going through my backlog. And while going through the backlog, I found the contemporary Wolfenstein games to be the most pleasantly surprising games in there so far. When I first played these games, I found them very underwhelming. Compared to their sister series Doom, which had next to no interruptions and operated entirely on this philosophy of non-stop moving and shooting like a crazy person, Wolfenstein is a slower paced game with a lot more cutscenes and dumbass fetch quests and figuring out where the hell to go. The gameplay just didn't really click with me at the time, and while a lot of the things I don't like about these games are still true, I actually discovered on my most recent playthrough of both games that the good parts are actually very good. No, really. Let's start with the stuff that I hate. Both of these games have these intermissions where you go back to the hub world thingy to go find either some document or some power tool or whatever to bring back to whoever asked for it. These moments are kind of important because there's a bunch of story stuff and character development happening here, but it's frustrating because I just want to get back to the fun part, you know what I mean? Again, compared to Doom, which is mostly just the fun parts, Wolfenstein felt much less efficient by comparison. This is supposed to be a badass FPS game, not stupid-ass Borderlands 3 where I'm running back and forth between 37 billion different people to complete their boring-ass fetch quests. Thankfully, new Colossus gives you this waypoint thing that lets you see exactly where you're supposed to go, which streamlines it a little more. I think they realize that even though the story is important, people don't actually enjoy doing fetch quests in a game that's supposed to be about destroying a billion people with your heavy-ass weapons. I did not complete that sentence in the script. I'm just ad-libbing now. Oh shit, I'm so out of practice. Even when you get back to the actual missions, there's still a lot of boring ass non-gameplay moments and stupid ass heavily scripted sequences that seem to exist mostly only to show you how pretty id Tech 6 looks or whatever. But I found that it more than makes up with all of that with the actual gameplay. Unlike all these prestige games where the non-gameplay and story elements are there to trick you into thinking the actual gameplay is better than it is, Wolfenstein's gameplay is actually really fucking great. The intensity is a big thing for me. I play through both of these games on the highest difficulty it would allow me to, and those massive shootouts could be extremely intense. I made the conscious decision to not use manual save even though it allows it, and only rely on the autosave, which made it feel a lot more legitimate while also making it extremely punishing and would often push me to the limit, at which point I would sometimes get really fucking pissed off. That is until I eventually beat whatever it was that I was stuck on and I went, I feel like that should have been harder actually. Since Wolfenstein is still largely a cover-based shooter, these games rarely approach the level of intensity that perhaps Doom 16 or Eternal do, but in those occasional moments where they get close, it's quite beautiful. But I think the variety of Wolfenstein's gameplay is the huge advantage here. Although tearing through hordes of enemies like a madman will always be fun, I actually found myself really appreciating the stealth gameplay a lot. This isn't some kind of Metal Gear level stealth we're talking about here, but it's serviceable enough to be satisfying and to make you feel like a badass. Silenced pistols, stealth takedowns, you have this sweet lean move that lets you carefully peek out from cover and pull off some quick shots, and throwing knives, aka the good shit. This is what they call the good shit. And to make it all even better, the games actually have these upgrade trees where you can get little perks for completing combat related challenges during gameplay. Every weapon has a purpose. As I said, the silenced pistol is a great option for quickly and quietly dispatching several enemies in a room. You got the laser craft worker or whatever. This is a good thing for metallic enemies because it cuts right through their armor. Shotgun shrapnel bounces around, letting you pull off these revolver ocelot style trick shots without putting yourself in harm's way. You can dual wield any weapon you can find two of, which makes you go fucking berserk. And let me tell you, that's a good feeling. What I love about Wolfenstein's gameplay loop is that even though you have cool stealth options, you always have the tools to swap immediately into combat mode and go apeshit on these motherfuckers if you make the mistake of getting caught. With games that are decidedly stealth games, failing stealth in any way usually means that the enemies will come and annihilate you instantaneously. This is not bad per se, it makes for a much more meticulous and tense game, but spending 5 minutes carefully crawling through a room just to slightly fuck it up at the last second and get shot down in the street like a rabid dog because you have no means of retaliation is extremely infuriating, and that's why I like games that can adequately reward different playstyles. That fluidity between Sneaky Snake and fucking Rambo makes Wolfenstein so much fun. I'm sure it's not the first game to achieve that, or even that it's the best of its kind, but it's still very engaging and offers a degree of strategy, and I forgot to write the end of the fucking shit in the script again. Oh, this is not going good. Then you have the story. I feel like a contemporary Wolfenstein is, at least logistically speaking, a tricky game to make a story for. The original Wolfenstein had a very minimalistic story. Basically, you're a prisoner of war, and then you stop being a prisoner of war because you shot the Nazis, and then you shot a few more of them, and then you kept shooting them, and then Hitler shows up in a robot suit, so you shot him as well, and then you win. Some of you may recall what John Carmack said about story in video games. Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. But of course, this was the early 90s we're talking about, and Johnny Boy himself retracted the statement, conceding that tons of games have great stories these days. I guess you could argue that the new Wolfenstein games should have, or at least could have, had an equally minimalistic story, kinda like the new Doom games, but at the same time, making a game with that kind of subject matter, with the technology we have today, would probably be a huge missed opportunity if the developers didn't at least try to come up with a story. Basically, the Nazis won the war and now control the entire world, so now Blowjob Blast-a-Bitch wakes up from his coma to join a resistance group to overthrow the regime. New Order and New Colossus have taken BJ Blazkowicz, who was initially a largely blank slate, and transformed him into an actual guy with emotions and shit. Wait, game characters have feelings now? What the fuck? You have all these characters desperately hanging on to a very thin thread of hope while the odds are impossibly stacked against them, with the entire world under the total control of a regime who is actively trying to kill them all. They're always cracking plans and trying to figure out how to help. They have dreams and aspirations and fears and values. These are all people who are very well fleshed out. The characters are all human and they like having fun, and they aren't just there to sit around and talk about how miserable life is. The story doesn't try to sugarcoat or pussyfoot around the Nazis, but it also has a very comical overtone that keeps it from feeling pretentious or too melodramatic, because at the end of the day, this is still a video game where you shoot a billion guys and blow up shit like a crazy person.
Thank you. My God.
The beginning of New Colossus literally has you running around in a wheelchair with a gun in your lap trying to recapture the U-boat. The comical nature of the story allows for a lot of emotional wiggle room so that you can take the serious moments seriously. A lot of games try to be serious, but because the only setting they have is look how sad and unfair the world is, it ends up being very fatigue-inducing, and you kinda just become blind to everything that's happening. But when you manage to strike that balance between funny and serious, it can make both these kinds of moments more effective. The best example of this is in New Colossus. After you get done taking revenge on your shithead father, you get captured by General Engel, and then you're put on trial for your crimes against the regime. Halfway through the trial, you get a prompt to break out of your chains and disarm the guard next to you, at which point you start this really intense shootout where you're fighting like hell and it's all badass and shit, and you're like, hell yeah, I am death incarnate! And then after dying 17 times because you're playing on the hardest difficulty, you push through the horde and then enter this room where BJ has this vision of his dead mother telling him how proud she is of him, and how he's a survivor and how they're both survivors, and life can get better, and he starts crying because he doesn't want to face reality, because it turns out this entire fight was an elaborate dream sequence he had in the middle of the trial. He went through the 5 stages of grief in this one sequence. His denial that the Nazis can stop him, his bloodthirsty anger as he bargains with his infinity guns and bullets and fire axes before entering the depression phase as he sees his already dead mother, remembering all he lost and all he's fighting for, and finally accepting his fate. This hit me like a fucking truck when I first saw it. I didn't question his ability to break out of his chains and do all that because the game has built him up like this Superman, but that realization that that's not how this is gonna work out was just brutal. This is the last game I was expecting to get emotional over, but that moment is some of that rare video game magic that most games can only dream of catching. But then of course, since it's Wolfenstein, naturally your friends catch your free-falling severed head with a drone and then put it in a jar and graft your head on a super soldier body so you can go to Venus and kick Hitler in the face. It elicits a variety of emotions instead of just driving down one emotional street for 15 hours. But the best thing about the story is the world building above everything else, the things that aren't outright told to you but are shown to you or told through subtext, like all the newspaper clippings which are very clearly censored and adjusted to brainwash the people into blindly supporting the regime. Blazkowicz is officially known in the world as one of the world's most notorious mass murderers, not unlike the way Hitler is known in real life. My favorite example of this is this extremely meta moment in New Colossus where you find this old arcade machine with a modified version of the original Wolfenstein where instead of shooting Nazis as Blastabitch, you're shooting Allied soldiers as some German equivalent of Blastabitch until you fight Blastabitch himself as the final boss. History is written by the victor, and if the Nazis won the war in real life and also managed to make video games, you know damn well that they'd be telling that story. So, the gameplay is spectacular, the story and writing is great, the world building is phenomenal, and id Tech 6 is pretty sweet, so, I guess all of this is to say that these games are, yeah, they're pretty good.
Oh Gott! Es mehr als perfekt!
Wah! It's me, Waluigi. I'm here to thank you for watching this video. I would like to also remind you that Phantom Bane has a Twitch channel where he will be streaming there sometimes, maybe. I don't know. Also, remember to hit the like button if you liked the video, or the dislike button if you're a cheater. And if you enjoyed watching, consider subscribing and clicking on the bell thing. That's all for now. Have a rotten day. Wah! That's a Wario.